Hello, good evening. This didn't work as expected. YouTube and OBS just threw me a little bit off kilter because, why should things just work the intended way? Anyway, good evening. I hope at least there is sound and that you can hear me, and that for once the microphone settings do their thing. So I guess I lost a few minutes and my nerves along the way. So let me just recollect what I wanted to do here. For example, not die on a TikTok. That would be a terrible way to start a screen. So, sound seems to be okay. Good evening, Stein, Felix, Mark, Mr. Glue Guy, Hallo Gasdanz, good evening. So, let me just get rid of this. It's been a while, I guess. Can someone verify that there is sound? It would be lovely. Hey Adrian. Hey Juan. Sound coming in great. All right. Well, I suppose that right now we are just vault people here, almost. But for posterity, and this being the first live stream in 5 years, I suppose that a lot of people who haven't been part of the community would like to have a short update. So, what have I been up to? So, when I started the live streams like 5 years ago, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was like, I want to contribute somehow, and along the way maybe learn a few things about facilitating sessions, and that's kind of half of the purpose. At the same time, I also created this Discord that has keeping me busy for 5 years now, which is the Vault. I will put some links down there after this stream. However, after a while of doing the YouTube thing, I got stuck a little bit about some things that puzzled me. For one, I had the impression that I somehow became part of a problem. I also felt like being a content creator doesn't resonate with me. At the same time, I really like doing certain things and wanted to do something. And above all, I had the impression that I lacked a framework to talk about what I wanted this to be about. Because I didn't really intend to create tutorials. That's not how creativity works for me, which a lot of people cannot hear me say anymore. But anyway, in hindsight, I really enjoyed the parts the most where I was trying to showcase like the creative process as unmasked and unadulterated as it is, or as it gets in this format. And a lot of people seem to like that. The parts about the reverse engineering are also kind of cool because I just enjoy reverse engineering stuff. At the same time, I'm a little bit undecided about that because, I mean, it's one thing to create a track, and when you're done, you're sharing the result. And what I can deconstruct in hindsight is by no means the process people went through to arrive at that result. This is something you would have to be a fly at the wall in the studio at the same time. And I felt like I do that a little bit injustice because I know how much of a struggle it can be to get from A to Z. And oddly enough, this is what I want to talk about tonight. By the way, if you're wondering what I'm looking down there, this is my way of preparing this stuff. And I'm already disliking the position of the cards. So, yes, and I also created Patreon, which you can become member of if you like, which I also dreaded really contributing to because I was missing this very perspective that recently came to me. So, one of the major questions that I got asked after posting this was, okay, so it's nice that you have a MIDI controller and stuff, but how does the project work? How do you arrange the thing? And I thought I had answered the question, and obviously I did not. So I wanted to create this session, meaning to talk about recording and arranging, but somehow that also fell off because I think that is not really the problem. And if you've been making music for a while, I hope at least you also have the experience that there are some kinds of projects where things just fall in place and all of a sudden you have a finished track. And you may not know what exactly happened or what you did right this time or not. But you have the experience. So there seems to be a thing with getting to the point of recording and arranging that seems to matter more than the actual recording and arranging. Good evening, Sandspace. And salute to your screen. I hope you are well. So, if arranging and recording is not always the problem, then what is? And with the help of my lovely community, who I pestered for 5 years about creative processes and shit, I somehow arrived at the point that the thing that gets me struggled, and probably you as well, is a lack of a creative safety net. Some kind of framework that tells you what to do. Because I think when you get stuck, you don't really need tools and techniques. You need processes and concepts and strategy. Not really knowing how to use an EQ, yeah, that's kind of nice and it helps in times, but when you're really stuck, you just don't know. And what lacks for me in the information landscape right now, or for a long time when it comes to music production, is how things relate to each other, because I think music production is dependency hell. And I learned a lot about this kind of dependency hell just by making demos. this kind of real-time executable stuff where I'm working with coders and 3D artists and graphians and other people, where I'm trying to deliver music towards a coherent result. And throughout this time of doing this for almost 30 years now, I learned a lot about how other people struggle and what they struggle with. And in the end, there seems to be a lot of things that are very, very common. There are common threads. Good evening, Dark Margaret. Hey, just passing here. This will be available after the stream. Yes, I will keep it for posterity because I'm trying to lay down some kind of framework for future streams. Glue Guy writes, when I'm stuck, I first ask myself what sounds I should get rid of. Yeah, that's also a good one. Anyway, I learned a lot from making demos and generally just making music. Also, some people accuse me of not being an artist because my music isn't found on platforms. There is a body of stuff that you can listen to on YouTube and a few things on streaming platforms and other things on Bandcamp. And I don't really feel like being one of the people who yell at the cloud that is Spotify, whilst being part of that problem as well. Anyway, so what I really enjoyed doing the most in the live sessions was stuff like this. For example, the getting stuck thing, just to show that, getting stuck is a thing, which you probably do all the time. And yeah. So, as an outline for this, I'd like to first talk a little bit about what it means to be stuck, to just have some kind of being on the same page about this. Talk about the creative safety net as a framework of concepts, processes, strategies, and then how I'm identifying screws in my music production process, using concepts that you can hopefully apply to yours. And for this, I like to start exploring what Robert M. Persick wrote about stuckness in his book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance in 1976, because I think it's a fantastic text, which I don't really want to read to you, but just get into that. So the premise of the book is that the author explores Zen or meditation through the lens of maintaining a motorcycle. And the book itself carries a lot of very complicated philosophical concepts, which are very, very easy to get stuck about. But the part he wrote about stuckness, that kind of stuck with me. So the idea is you have a motorcycle and the engine is broke. And you somehow want to fix the engine because you are curious and interested and able to do this. But there is a screw that's stuck and it prevents you from getting rid of the cover, so you cannot get to the engine. And that is like, if you think about stuckness, I think there are different levels of stuckness. There is like a moment of irritation that gets you stuck. Maybe that's level 1. It's like, oh, something didn't work as expected. And only if I fixate on the fucking engine and not the screw, I get to the second level of stuckness, where I get really frustrated. And I like that in his text he makes a differentiation. So, and this part I would like to read. So, this is the situation. If you're experienced, you'd probably apply a penetrating liquid and an impact driver at this point to the screw. But suppose you're inexperienced and you attach a self-locking plier wrench to the shank of your screwdriver and really twist hard, a procedure you had success with in the past, but which this time succeeds only in tearing the slot of the screw. And I think that's where stuckness level 2 kicks in. This level where your mind was already thinking ahead to what you would do when the cover plate was off, and so it takes a little time to realize that this irritating minor annoyance of a torn screw slot isn't just irritating and minor, and that you're stuck. And I think it's very important to register this fixation on the engine as the means to an end. The goal, you see yourself driving your motorcycle again. You hear the track that's recorded and arranged and done. And oddly enough, at this point, I would be confusing the goal with the result. The result of having met the goal is me driving across the countryside. But right now, the goal has shifted from fixing the engine to taking the screw seriously. And this, I think, very well applies to music production because, yeah, there are screws to be found. And these are the screws that I would like to talk about later. But what are these screws? And how do we find them? And Robert Pirsig writes that this stuckness is zero moment of consciousness, right? You're honked and kaput, which I really like. It's a miserable experience emotionally because you're losing time and you're incompetent because it's just a stuck screw. And for God's sake, please take the machine to a mechanic. Like, the imposter syndrome has fully kicked in. And so does the fear-anger syndrome. And eventually, maybe if you get stuck for this long enough, you just want to take the entire motorbike or project and just throw it somewhere into a river. And this is where having experience with such situation comes in handy. And a framework of having gone through this process. Because not even a tutorial would help you with that. The tutorial would say, get rid of the screw. So, not really useful. And the question then is, what really helps? And I like the idea that stuckness shouldn't be avoided because it cannot be avoided. And now I would like to introduce a few concepts. I also, by the way, tried to make this nice and OBS with design and have like headlines and everything, so I could show you visually on the screen what it is that I'm talking about right now. And yeah, I got stuck. Anyway, concepts. By the way, does anyone have questions? Is this making any sense up to this point? If you have questions, please insist or ask, and I will try to incorporate them. I'm just trying to not move through this too quickly. So, stuckness, when we're really stuck, we fixate on the wrong thing at the wrong time, and disregard the all of a sudden important other things that are in the way. So when I think about a creative safety net that allows me to interact with these situations when making music, one important thing for me is that perfectionism sucks. It's nothing I hold myself accountable to. I thought I did for a long time, and probably a lot of you think that too, but did it really resonate with you? Like being a perfectionist, doing things for the sake of perfection doesn't make any sense, because, I mean, in the end, there is no phone number I can call like 0800, hey, is this perfect? It doesn't work. So this doesn't really resonate with me. What does, though, is I'm looking for coherence. And just to provide an example, the project that I just uploaded, namely this one, this to me is a coherent piece of work. Because I know that, or I have learned about myself, that my work revolves around a sense of time, in a sense of space or place, or maybe everything together. So there is a little bit of something between the difference of perfect and coherent. And if you listen to this project, at the very beginning, there is a loop and it clicks. And I wondered, do I need to get rid of that? Once I noticed, it got kind of annoying, and the perfectionist thinking me, which I still have, but I just don't want it to overtake, had said like, this clicking is annoying, you need to get rid of this. Until I listened to the track a few times and realized that the clicking, it goes away. Everything else is masking it. And it kind of works beautifully with what I'm trying to do here. You notice a thing and then you just forget it. And I think it's the forgetting that also relates to the entire experience itself, which is, in the end, what my work is about. I can only encourage you to think about what's your work about. Maybe it's about something completely different. I don't know. But I really like being able to understand that, to me, making music is about experiencing time in a certain way, especially with these kind of floating organic things. I want to be in the now, just connected to the sound, and remove like everything else. The second important concept for me is realistic expectations about myself, which includes I will get stuck. It's inevitable. There's always a screw somewhere along the way, and there's another one, and that's just how it is. Because if you're fixing a motorbike, you're actually fixing a thing that already exists. You're not building a motorcycle, right? With creating music and about everything else that's creating, you're trying to, at least to some extent, create something new. And this has to come with not knowing how this works, because every setup is different. Maybe not on a surface level, because in the end, you can categorize like all dub techno tracks as dub techno. They are somewhat noisy, they have a bass drum or not, and that's kind of the similarity thing. and it's probably using a lot of minor chords, and it's spacious. So, but if you look closer, there are many, many, many different facets, and because music production is dependency hell, it also means that you cannot just simply remove one thing without taking care of what it means. Good example being you're building a Lego car. You know, you have the tutorial, it says what you want, you arrive at this specific model, but what if you want bigger wheels? In this case, you would have to rebuild the entire construction below. And if you want it to be blue, you also need to tear it apart and put it back together again. And with music production, it's like that, really. It's not as easy as just exchanging a bass drum sample. There seems to be more, and it seems to be somewhat difficult. So my expectation is that when I'm attempting to change something about a project, I'm expecting to trip over screws. That's just what happens. And I'm promising myself to not judge myself or be unfair to myself, because these are unknown unknowns I'm dealing with. And I think it's unrealistic to think, oh, that's never a problem, unless you have a tool set. In the end, what I also know is that my brain wanders around and I will lose focus. Shift happens. It just happens. Hello, Sienna. And hello, Neutral Container. And yes, you should read the book. Try. It's tough. It's a challenging read. Anyway, I will lose focus and attention, and I will focus on the wrong thing at the wrong time, and I will get upset. That's just part of the process, and I expect that. And that to me is having a realistic expectation about a creative effort. It doesn't work like tutorials. Like I said earlier, in tutorials we show off the things we are done with. What we don't show you is the struggles, right? Next concept. The important one. The concepts I was just talking about earlier, to me, are part of what the French chef calls mise en place. Mise en place is everything that you need to do and take care of before you start to do the actual cooking. So that means you have to sharpen your knives, cut the ingredients, select the ingredients first, make sure you have fresh stuff. You know what you want to cook, otherwise you cannot do the first steps. You do everything you possibly can to make sure you have a setup of a high quality so you can cook or prepare a meal of a high quality. So you can move on, be confident about cooking. I mean, you're also cooking. What do you hate the most? Maybe, I don't know, knife is not sharp, or you forgot an ingredient while something is in the pan and it's frying and you need to be in two places at the same time. It doesn't work. So mise en place to me is the setup to the point where I want to start arranging and recording. And I cannot stress enough the importance of the point of wanting to arrange and or record. It's not something I'm dreading. It's something I'm only putting aside when I'm not done with my mise en place, when the preparation is not finished. the question then is, what the heck isn't finished? And I've been also having had a lot of discussions in the community about this and that and tools and AI and doing stuff and ownership. And in the end, I realize that I need to be confident no matter what. If you're confident with using AI samples, the truth, do it. The question to me is, how many black boxes can one use where you don't really know what's going on inside and still feel confident about what's going on? Which is also why, for example, making my own sounds and presets is important to me. I want to understand how they work. I need to know how a sound ticks. And I only get to know the sound by making the sound. Which is why if I would just talk about this project that's playing right now without really in depth talking about how I made it, which I can't because it's done in the past, I can't really convey to you how you can become confident if you just treat it like a checklist. Yes, you kind of made it, but you also want to be able to know how it behaves. And to me, the act of creating sounds is something that I put aside a lot of time for that. The process of me creating sounds is like really listening to stuff and interact with it. I will play around with filters. And yes, a lot of people are like, it's just, then you get stuck just playing around and falling in love with the thing. I don't know either. Is this really good? I think it's useful. It's more useful than not doing it. It's also useful to know when to stop and move on or tend something else. But I think it's more useful to really have fun with the sound, because this way you really get it and what makes it tick. And that's not just a synth presets also. For example, if you run a sound through a distortion, how does it behave if you drive the level a little bit more? If you filter it, in which area will it sound like squelchy, creaky, strange, but in which other areas does it work? And this way, if you're using a MIDI controller, for example, to control the sound, you can adjust for these things that you find. Hello, Tease. Getting stuck on Mise en Place. Yes. If that's a good thing that you're saying there. I think you only get stuck if you don't find the point of confidence to move on. In the end, it's always about a lack of confidence. And I have a few things now that I can at least propose that you can try to maybe look for screws and identify screws, which are very useful to me. And the first is, as a concept, that everything affects everything. This is something that Greg Scott told on his YouTube channel, Kush Audio, a while ago, where he explains how, for example, the bass affects the high end. And I'd like to extend that the first things you do in a project affect the end. So whenever I arrive at a point of stuckness where I have the impression something's off, I will automatically gravitate towards the things I did first and try to adjust a few details. It's very often just about details. And very often I find these details in, for example, envelopes, because also everything to me is about envelopes. You can, with a good envelope, granularly control the attack to sustain ratio of your bass drum, so you don't need a compressor. But only if the attack envelope is fast enough and has enough slack room for letting you adjust the character. Another thing that I'm often looking at is note lengths, because, for example, low end affects the high end. If I start and I think I want to have a very, very long fat bass drum that's like really ruling the track, I may set it up like that with a very high sustain level and whatever. And along the way, maybe I arrive at a setup that where I want to have more depth and high-end air presence, which is getting dragged down by the sustain of the bass drum and the length of the note. So I need to shorten the release a little bit. That is also a detail, sure shot, at the middle of a project. If you made the bass and kick early, that needs revisiting in some capacity, one way or another. Another concept is that loudness affects depth perception. And for this, I like to think about the soundstage. I mean, if you use a goniometer, this kind of thing, for your tracks, you are known with this diamond. And depth, to me, works like this. It's like a pyramid. If I would twist this entire thing by 90 degrees, this here is my front stage. It's mainly in the center, but the depth is the distance between the loudest part and the quietest part I can still perceive. If you think about you're standing in the Alps or in a tunnel, how deep or wide, how deep the thing sounds depends on the quietest thing, the end of the reverb tail. Not the beginning, it's the end. And this is, unfortunately, influenced by how much you cover up your front stage with content. If you make your track really loud because you want to have like a brutal track, and in the end, somewhere along the way, you think about more depth would be cool, which also happens to me. The first thing that I'm reaching for when I notice my depth doesn't work is I dial back everything that I have on the master, because I assume I'm too loud. Something about my ratio is off, because also width is not depth. If you think about width, the first things that you can hear from the sides are the first reflections coming at you from walls nearby. If you want depth, it's probably somewhere behind the loudest parts in the center. And Fluxion's track are, for example, a great example of that. They are almost mono, the old stuff, and yet it's deep, 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 because it's not loud. And loudness in this case, you also have to differentiate between how much loudness and where you can actually have a very loud and pronounced low end if the rest of the track above that, like here in this area, has a lot of space. You can listen around that. And one more concept. Textures emerge from the source material. What do I mean with that? what I'm looking for is texture in my sounds. And if you think about how basically all sounds can be decomposed into sine waves, the fundamental frequencies define they carry the note and the frequency, but everything that happens above that is texture, especially the more you move upwards. And to me, texture happens above 4K. It's very often the very high end that creates this impression. And if you think about texture, I mean, any kind of material you can touch, it's about the surface. And in sound, the surface of sound, it happens in the high spectrum or the higher spectrum of each individual sound. It kind of propagates. If you have a bass line, the texture sits like 1 or 1.5 up to 2 octaves above that. But you can even boost 3 and 4 octaves above to make the texture more audible and visible. And what I'm looking for is sounds that already have some kind of texture baked in. And very often it's just noise. It's noise, which is why adding noise, like besides as a layer, it doesn't communicate with the sound. It has to be an emerging quality, so it propagates through the effect chains and everything. So textures emerge from the source. I will make sure when I get stuck to also check for texture and what kind of texture, how it propagates to the entire impression of the track. And in the end, a last concept is forcing it. It will just affect the flow of the entire track. And especially when making dub techno tracks, what I'm looking for is slowness. So the last thing that's probably going to help me is brute forcing myself through stuckness, or trying to arrange the fucking thing now, despite knowing it's still not where it is. So what I need to identify these screws then is the beginner's mindset, the thing that Robert Pirsig also talks about. You need to let go of the result and the goal for a second and redefine that. And that also happens to me, I think I'm at a point, it's all a classic thing. I sit down, I start making a track, I think it's awesome and great. I save the thing, close it, come back the next day, open it, and wonder, what the fuck did I think there? What is it that appealed to me about this? And I know it's coming. And I also know way back when, then I completely destroyed and judged the thing to death. This shit is like the ultimate shit judgment you can apply to your past self, because it means this isn't rescuable. There is nothing I can possibly do to fix or mend this. I suck. And this is something that I don't want to do to myself. Hey, Stefan. Good evening. So I'm prepared to get the judging from the back of my head, but I'm also prepared to say, hey, sit down, have a coffee, let's check out what it is that I liked about this yesterday. Because I guess my past self had a reason to do this, and if I deem it to be shit, there is no reason. I don't give myself reason to still look at this. And in my experience, everything has something in there. And what I do then if this moment of judgment is, I'm done with that, so I'm asking myself questions about the concepts earlier. Because my brain probably says it's boring. It may be too repetitive in the way that every single note just is exactly mathematically correct the same, because this is what DAWs and DAWs do best. Computers are awesome at calculating and coming to the same conclusion again and again and again. And just in case you haven't noticed, we are listening to this thing in the background for how long are we streaming? 45 minutes already. I didn't change anything. It's possible to bake in or create things that are repetitive, which don't get boring too easily. So the important question then is, does this lack texture? Which makes me solo every track and look for texture somewhere in the high end. And I will also show you what this is specifically later. But first I'd like to go through this to just conclude it. I will check the high end. I will check out every sound. Look, okay, so this is my bass. This happens here. What's going on here above? And can I still hear it in the mix? Chord, pad, hats, everything. Maybe the hi-hat doesn't need to contribute to the texture, but for example, the low end, if I'm compressing the master a little bit with dynamics processing or whatever, it will somehow affect the high end, and it will start breathing. The texture will start responding to what I do in the low end. And I ask myself, does it lack depth? If it does, check my compression settings and the dynamics processors and find out how much depth do I really want. Because likewise, depth can also be represented via texture. Very often, if you listen to the old Maurizio stuff and chain reaction things, there is a lot of air, which basically also is just texture, very faint in the background, just a hint of the end of the space somewhere down there, right? And then, last question I'm asking, does it lack groove? Is everything in my track quantized to depth? How do my sequences look? Do I just use the same note length? And I know I'm repeating myself, I talked about this in earlier lessons, but this is one of the key aspects, these three things. Texture, depth, and groove are pointers that I can easily check for. And if I look at my sequences and I don't find anything that makes me go like, maybe remotely interesting, maybe because, oh, by the way, velocity variation is also part of the sequence. As soon as I see something like this, the velocity randomization, I already know, well, it's at least adding a little bit of randomness. And I need that little bit of randomness in the movement. So, as a rep, mise en place to me is super important, and to me part is not judging myself, being prepared to get stuck all the time. It's a habit. I think it's part of my process, and I also think it's what makes professionals professional, is that this is a mutual part of the process. They are prepared. They have some kind of creative safety net that allows them to approach these situations with ease, that an inexperienced person, unfortunately, cannot have but has to develop somehow. And I can really encourage you to make as many experiments with sound as possible to learn how sound works, especially through the lens of texture, depth, and groove. And I suppose this is my TED Talk about creative safety nets and how I identify screws to arrive at a point to get my Mise en place done, to move to the cooking of a track, the recording and arrangement and or recording with confidence. Hey Alkama! And right now I'd like to check in with the chat. Any questions, remarks, things you did not understand? Yeah, I'm also aware this doesn't necessarily apply to everyone, but just please pick. I'm also curious. To me, this is a framework just to get this framework of thinking about sound. I will use in future videos again and again and again. And my usual answer to people if they get stuck with a loop is to check for texture, depth, and groove. And obviously there is a lot more tool and tech-wise in how to do that. And we can talk about this all day in the next 10 years and will not exceed or find the end. Stein asks, what about direction in your creative process as in framework of confidence? I'm not sure if I understand you correctly. So everything I talked about now exists or I have in place to give me confidence. Remove any part and I'm less confident. But so the creative safety net to me is a framework for moving through the process of music production with confidence, even though knowing I will not always be confident. I cannot be. It's a creative thing. It's chaos. I start knowing I will get stuck, inevitably. I just don't want to get stuck to the highest level, cluster stuck, or whatever you want to call that. I will get stuck. And when I get stuck, I'm using these pointers and these questions to go back. Even in a situation where I open yesterday's project and wonder, what was I thinking? Then I will go digging. I will know that I've finished enough projects already. I can find ways to mitigate the situation and make this interesting. I firmly believe that everything can be made into something interesting if you have the capacity of persevering through that, if you have a creative framework or a safety net. This is really what carries us through these projects and these situations where you get stuck and it sucks. I don't shit gold. Nobody does. And that's kind of the fallacies also. If you use reference tracks, you use a thing that has probably been mastered by a mastering engineer. So you're playing an unfair game. What you're comparing yourself with is not one artist, but already two. One who did the track and the mixing and the creative shit, and the person who's done the mastering. And this is important to know. I mean, I've been talking to enough people and I heard enough music that was work in progress stuff from even renowned artists that you also know to understand they are also just cooking with water. Everybody is just cooking with water. Matthias Friedel, as a mastering engineer, he has the capacity of mastering his own stuff. Will he always do that? I don't know. What I know for sure is the value that I'm getting out of asking a mastering engineer. So I have a vinyl coming up soon in May, and to me, for one, mastering is the entire process of not just making one track nice or something, but to make it coherent for release on a specific type of medium. In this case, vinyl. It has other laws of physics applied to streaming platforms. And what I want from a mastering engineer is the confidence of getting the files back and not having to decide this shit for myself. I'm unable to master my own stuff. That's a little bit judgy of myself. I have already mastered my own stuff, also to a degree where I was satisfied with it, especially in the game realm. I had to do a lot of mastering. But it's getting rid of that burden. To make all these final decisions is an important part of the process for many, many, many artists out there. Because they don't want to do this. It gets you stuck. It gets you uncertain, especially if you are trying to master your own album. Jesus, that is fucking ugly. You have maybe collected 5, 8, 10, 12 tracks over a period of, I don't know, months, and they are somewhat different, and all of a sudden you get to be the final person to decide how this will be pressed on a medium. Takes balls to do that, and it's also a decision that I, as a label, wouldn't necessarily want to leave in the artist's hands, because it is really a lot you're asking for. This is why we have mix engineers and producers and mastering engineers, because these are all separate disciplines of dealing and navigating through fucking dependency hell. Alkama writes, mix and master is terrifying, honestly, yeah. Hey Yannick writes, no, makes perfect sense. You just don't have the objective listening experience because you produce it. Yeah, you get attached to it, and that's it. And then you tend to focus, hyperfixate on everything that is a fault. Especially if you try to correct these faults yourselves without really knowing how the tools work and the psychoacoustics behind mastering. And to an inexperienced or semi-experienced producer who maybe has started or has done this for 5 to 7 years, you may be reasonably comfortable creating something, coming up with interesting sounds, adding textures, making interesting grooves, making shit sound deep enough, making it be mixed reasonably well, and all of a sudden trying to fix detailed problems can be like really complex. And although there are tools out there who want to do that, they are trained, especially the AI stuff, is trained on perfectly flat, average sounding mixes. Reminder, we're talking about dub techno here. Yeah? Please look at Maurizio tracks and whatever on a frequency analyzer, and you will see how skewed these mixes are. And that's what makes them interesting. The last thing you want is to create some kind of special sound design, engineer depth thing that really floats your boat, and in the end, just kill it. At least that's not what I want. Then I don't have to do the sound engineering and sound design and the processing and the programming. Why do all these hours of work if in the end I'm going to press it into a flat pancake? I don't get it. That doesn't feel nice to my past self. It also doesn't feel nice to what the music landscapes want, especially in a time where people start making videos about entire genres that seemed to exist 10 years ago. And now they are gone and people are whining about that. Right? Oh, we're so sad. This entire sound is gone. Whilst turning their music into fucking pancakes. Rand and Stein writes, it's a little bit like trying to take photos in your own city. You do not look at it with new eyes. Yeah, that's the beginner's mindset. Like these problems, to really fix them, it becomes more and more of a struggle the longer you work on a project. And I mean, this horizontal thing I talked about, it occupied 6 years of my brain somewhere in the back. It was kind of done and kind of not done. And I wanted to do the mastering because it's just one track and because I didn't want to ask anyone else and because I had the impression I can do that. But somehow I couldn't. And then I tried and tried again and it didn't get where I wanted it to be. And fortunately, Herbert, Variety of Sound, released a new plugin that did exactly the thing that I knew I wanted to have, which was some kind of vignetting around the impression of space and depth. The Feenstaub TX processor, it does it. But it's also, frankly, the first of its kind of processor with this kind of quality that does it. In this level, I don't know what he did there, but that is magical to me. And I also talked to Herbert a lot during the last year about all kinds of nerdy sound things. And I understood that a lot of what I had issues with is not just in my head, but these are actual, real problems, but just on a very tiny scale. So details matter. That's another thing. God is in the details. I say God is in the details. It's in the details. Yannick writes, fidelity really isn't everything. Don't get lost in it. Yeah, I recently was at Ski Mask's studio and he was piping his original 909 through a 25 euro Boss mixer. Yeah, a lot of fun. And I mean, the 909 in itself, it's really shitty. It doesn't even have bass, unless it has a lot of bass, just in the very, very low end and very, very faint. And you only get to notice it if you're using samples where the bass has been gotten rid of, or if you're using the stereo output of the 909, completely different sounds. If you look at the sample of a kick from the 909 individual output, the initial click, it will point downward, whereas on the stereo bus, it will point upward because there is some kind of, I don't know, diodes, weird shit inside the 909 amplifier that also inverts the phase polarity of the sound. And I mean, if you use a 909, you always get the noise and the texture of the 909. The texture of the cable you get for free. So, because I promised to also look at the project that's been buzzing along, I want to do this briefly and quickly because it's a very specific kind of project and I don't think it's a great thing as a tutorial because it's just one thing, but I promise to do this and I like to deliver that. Sienna writes, inverting op-amp stages just makes sense because non-inverting have less configuration space. yeah, electronics. That's a little bit beyond me still, even though I've been also researching that a lot, but I'm still learning. Ich bin noch in der Ausbildung. So, I would like to now go through this project, and I need you to tell me when the sound is too loud, because we are going to listen to a few things now. And yeah, I'm trying to navigate the levels according to OBS, and I try not to clip. I try not to clip. So, according to my gut, this should be fine. Yeah, one is lebenslang in the Ausbildung, that is correct. Training never ends. Can you still hear me? Is the music loud enough? Anything clippy? It's fine. Stein says it's fine, so I trust him it is. This project was the result of an experiment with me fiddling around with Heinbach-style tape looping in the box, like 5 years ago or something, where I just used Ableton's Echo on a very, very long loop. I think the maximum loop length, fed just a chord into that, let it ran through at high feedback just a couple of times, playing around with the noise, picking up texture, and baking that into a sample, which resulted in this sample. And let me just give you the full picture. And you can see the noise up here, all the texture that's in there. It's just Ableton Echo noise. And when I started sequencing, I knew that I wanted to break this sample up into various sounds and reuse it and repurpose in about every way possible. So the entire project, apart from one wavetable instance, it's just this one sample. It's all the same sample. Because if you, like I said earlier, everything is basically just sine waves, and you can break down sounds using filters into, for example, the lowest component, which is the fundamental or the sine wave. You can also use a high-pass filter to create the same thing into a hi-hat, or a bandpass filter to turn it into whatever, depending on the note you're playing it with. And it just started with me laying down one note and just let the sample play. And then I started filtering it, because I knew I want to have just the low layer as a fundament, less of the texture. Oddly enough, then boosting the texture on the sides to add a little bit of more width impression. It's a great thing to use mid and side EQing for. If you just want, it opens a little bit the spectrum, just a little bit. Otherwise, I think there isn't too much interesting other things going on. Except I'm using the shaper to add a little bit of scratchy stuff, which is also kind of faint. I'm not even sure if you can hear it, but doesn't have that much of an effect. Yeah, I did a little bit of programming with filters. This sound is really just the lower fuzzy layer. But I used it to create ascent into the delay. And the idea was that there is quite of texture, and because it's so low tonally, it can work well as a percussion, which eventually it did. So on this delay send, I used Shaperbox as kind of a gate replacement. All it does is, yeah, it does a little bit of sophisticated stuff. It's opening the frequency bands at a different pace and with a different envelope, which gives this kind of percussion-y thing that I'm then sending into good old diffuse by Serene Machines, which has a very 60s kind of vibe in certain settings, especially if you send it through it twice. I also added a little bit of movement using a frequency shifter. I will shut up. It's very slow and subtle, but this is the parts that creates the autonomously moving part of the track that fights the boringness and the repetition. Last but not least, I have boosted the high end like a lot. To get even a little bit of more of the very high airy feel onto the master and into the other processors. Next one is this layer. It's exactly the same thing, exactly the same sound, but this time I have a little bit of a sequence going on, just also static notes. But what I added here to make it more interesting, I set the sample offset to the mod wheel, which I'm modulating like so. So I'm basically shifting the sample offset around a few times to get more variation into the sequence. And you can also see this. It's reflected there. And how I'm doing that is I just listen. I set the modulation amount and I start drawing some envelope, and there is also nothing scientific about that. I just fiddle around with a pattern that I think that's kind of interesting. I like to listen to that. Nothing further. Okay, it also goes through bandpass filter. And this one I added, I think, no, I didn't, to a MIDI controller. No, not that one. Although I'm sure I did. Ah, no, I didn't use this one. By the way, this is just again some sound shaping. Let's go through these step by step. So like I said earlier, the low end, in this case, the fundamentals also impact the high end, which I'm also boosting. But if I wouldn't be boosting this. I've got the impression I get more of noise on the stereo field by just doing these. It's very faint. That's why I'm also boosting this. And then I've got my MIDI on, where is it? And why? There it is. I've got my MIDI controller tied to Joachim's lovely Enceladus distortion EQ thingy. And maybe at this point it makes sense to talk about, just add again, that I'm thinking about what I'm looking for, or I'm coming from the old school dub way of recording, where there was a huge Tascam mixer with the channel faders and EQs and aux sends, and I'm used to using that as much as I can to arrange and record my sounds, because that's what most people did back in the day, in the early 90s, mid 90s ish, because you didn't have that much outboard gear. And so by default, when I'm thinking about arranging and recording a setup, I gravitate towards just channel level faders, EQ bands, and sends. And very often that's all I need to create or record 15 minutes of music. Usually not much more than, how many parameters do we have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So 11 parameters, that's already medium much. I mean, in the end, I need to remember this stuff and somehow play with it. I cannot hold in my brain like 50 parameters of something. And I'm lazy, I like shit to be easy. So that's this sound. And also in the end, I ran it through a compressor just to give it more oomph. I think I shifted something around. This is what I talked about earlier, about depth and stuff. When I was fiddling around with this, I briefly put down the filter, and now the compressor starts to respond way more. I think it's set there. And what I like about Rough Rider, it's a free one. I think there's even Rough Rider 3 by Audio Damage. This one's really brutal and unforgiving, and it has a very harsh, stone-like, but not digital attack. It's great for turning sounds into more percussive areas. So, next track. Same sound again. Also a fantastically interesting sequence. It's an octave up. Sorry. Bandpass slightly different. And I think in this case, yes, I've got the filter on a parameter as well. Am I using this in this sequence? Wait. Interesting. Because I just copied the mid layer, I inherited this one without knowing, and it seems to do something. No, it's not, because it's not retriggered. So just a little bit of EQing to be sure. If I go towards down to the low end, I don't want it to interfere too much with the low layer. And a little bit of stereo widening phasing. Let me just play without and then engage the effect again. It's also faint. Around there. But you can hear it if you focus on it, and your brain registered this. If you're playing this together, it's not like, whoa, big move. It's a small detail, and it's enough. And I'm also feeding this into the reverb, which I also put on a controller, so I can play around with the element a little bit. In this case, the reverb, it's a good old Valhalla vintage verb. And I'm also using Bruteforce on this, which is a lovely automatic corrective EQ with a lot of jizz inside, which I think doesn't use machine learning, or does it? I don't know. I like using that because I got it for free, and because it can be abused as a sound design tool very easily. It can also sound completely rubbish in an interesting way. But I have used it in this case before the deal reverb, because the sound covers a wide frequency range and picks up a lot of resonances in some areas, and I just wanted to not bother with that as a quick fix. And even after the reverb, I used it, well, let's see what it sounds like. It's kind of funny because somehow they try to do the same, but the effect is very different before and after the reverb. Yeah, utility just to raise the gain, and then I'm once again raise the texture of the reverb, because the reverb is basically, in this case, also noise generator in the very high end, which is a piece of texture that I want to have as part of my sound. And there is the hi-hat, which is also the same sound. And this one started differently. I can tell whenever I want to make hi-hats, I will start with this kind of sequence, 16th, because it's what hi-hats do, right? And I knew I wanted to have some variation, so I also added, I think, some mod wheel to sample start modulation. And I additionally also added the internal sampler oscillator, which adds some kind of ring modulation and to just make it a little bit more interesting. Low envelope filtering, of course, it's a hi-hat. It's supposed to be a hi-hat. Has to be bandpassed or high-passed or high-shelf, whatever, which it does. And then I also added a little bit of random LFO modulation to the sample offset as well, because it plays so often. I don't just want to have the sequence on its own. Can I disable that easily? 33, I tried. So this too isn't like really changing the world or something, but it's a detail that your brain registers as slightly different than before. And it just adds to the impression that slightly different happens. I think the noise layer is also just the sample. And it's occasionally clicking because it does a thing, and I don't know why or what. I think I'm playing that on a very, very, very low octave. Did I do anything of interest here? No. These are also leftovers by duplicating it here from one of these layers and then just extending the length of the sequence to something. How long is it? 15. And in this case, I think I've chosen the 15 deliberately to not use 16, just as a form of not working with straight divisions or multiplications all the time. And just to be sure, what am I doing here? This could become really terrifying loud. Just a second. So now you still got the fundamentals. All the chord is still kind of in there. Auto filter is a great way to just get rid of that. Because level has went down significantly. I'm raising it a lot. Now you start to hear probably I think, I'm sorry, this here I think is an artifact from the noise from echo, which you now just hear more. And I think, yeah, why did I do the width thing? Ah, yes. So, and also my stance on width processors, it depends on this. How wide is the sound already and how much are you moving beyond the correlation mark? And in this case, 220% even at a lot of widening. But for the most part, it will not interfere with the stereo sum. And then just more EQing. For whatever reason I did this, I don't know anymore. I'm sorry. And last but not least, there is the very interesting low pad layer, which is a fantastically interesting single note. that just hums along. Let's see what these do. What was my rationale there? So for one, I also added a parameter to modulate this. To be able to really, it's a little bit of a drastic measure, and I think when I recorded I didn't go that far, but having the ability to really go for drama is nice. So, and the processing on here is Pultec, which does probably the usual Pultec-y thing. No, it's just a little bit of a low end boost. Let's see if I can look at it here this way. By the way, TDR Prism is the best thing that you can buy for free. It's a fantastic new spectrum analyzer. It's like a year old or something. Completely replaced Voxengo Span for me because it's more responsive and has a more detailed low-end reading, which also represents the DC offset, which is the area around 0 to probably maybe 5 Hertz. What else is going on here? The Cambridge to lower or counter the DC offset that I've risen with this one probably. So the Pultec boosts like entire shelf. And you can see right now we have the DC offset around minus 100 to 90, and now I would expect it to be higher at times, and it's not. But to be sure, I wanted to kill it, which I didn't. Oddly enough, back then I didn't use or have Prism, so I assumed that this would have more effect, but maybe the effect is not visible, audible enough for Prism. I don't know. Sometimes what I do also doesn't make sense. But maybe it made sense here. So Devil Lock is this Shure level lock, brutal level amp thingy. It has quite a lot of distortion. In this case, it's adding a lot of texture. And this is what I was talking about earlier. I want texture from as many sources that I have, so because I cannot introduce them later. And there you go. There is texture. The question is, does it also change? Ah, that's why the Cambridge exists. It also impacts the texture. Like I said, everything affects everything. The low end impacts the high end, especially with these crazy kinds of distortions. And that entire thing goes through. So this is my master. There is no kind of really special grouping stuff or whatever in this case. On my master boss, I've got another instance of Slick EQ just to raise the overall texture of the track, the entire thing. And this is also something that I do. I not only raise the high end on the textures at the source or the channel, but I will sometimes also do this deliberately on groups. And sometimes I will even filter stuff at the source to boost it together with other sources on a group to get a more consistent, coherent, high-end air texture impression. And this again, it doesn't change the world, it's a little bit of more openness. In the end, it goes through good old Fairchild, which does crazy amounts of gain reduction. Again, not doing much. I just wanted it to have a little bit of extra coherence. And it's super, super subtle. It's probably doing more if you start really going crazy with the entire modulation, which is something that I only have so much control over when recording something live. And I wanted this one to be the one in charge of doing its thing. And apart from that, there is nothing else going on. Except everything I talked about earlier. Like the listening, the refining, the taking a break in between, the not liking what I hear, not being sure what to do or what to do next. These are all things that are part of every single project, or most of the projects. And I'm very confident that this is also true for about every artist whose music you genuinely like. And I think it's kind of it. Questions? Hey Travis. Good to see you here. Hey Jonef. Thank you very much. And hey Niels, yeah, Holland headband. It's Holland or France, depending on how you look at it, I guess. I'm flexible. So, are there any open threads or things that I didn't close yet? Some trains of thoughts where you wish you would like to hear more about for this scope? Has this been useful at all? I don't know. Do you even remember what I was talking about earlier? Stein writes, I find it very interesting. It gives me a lot of things to experiment with. Yeah, that's great. And greetings to the Netherlands, Niels. So, I think I'm calling it a stream session, I guess, and will refer to this in the future for sure. What I will also do is adding some more resources and links to the description, proper timestamps to the sections as good as I can. I hope I didn't jump around too much, but I've got the impression this worked. This is also something I learned. which was an unknown to me, if I'm able to use this bunch of cards as outline. I think I want a spot more like close to the camera next time, although I don't know how that should work without putting it in front of the screen. Anyway, it works good enough. And yeah, I'm looking forward to doing this more again. And like I said earlier, I don't resonate with the content creator thing. I would like to share what I've learned in 30 years of doing this. And I know 30 years sounds like a very long time. I also need to check out 2025, 90. Yeah, that's about 30 years, I guess, even more. I have ADHD, potentially I'm autistic, and sound is just the rabbit hole that I feel most comfy with and what I've been thinking about most of the time in my life, if I did not think about screwing myself over. Yonef writes, I love this kind of textured sound design. It reminds me of the old tracks by Vancouver and Chain Reaction, Elevation and Solanos. Yes, I also love this kind of stuff. And I mean, they have also extensively boosted the high end. And I mean, that's one of the beautiful things you get with hardware for free is just noise. And a lot of little saturation in every gain stage that you hit. Weird. It's lovely. Juan asks, any special work around the reverb? I talked about this briefly earlier, and this is a measure of laziness. By no means do you need anything like this or Soothe or whatever. I've been lazy. I could have also went along with traditional EQing. And by the way, this is the EQ that I use most of the time right now because it's simple. It's like a console EQ. It just has 3 bands. It has a lot of saturation options and different colors, a lot of output stage saturation options, which very often are very faint, but start making sense if you use them with very quirky input signals. And also, one of the main points about this thing is a great sound sculpting EQ because it has a weird kind of output gain compensation, which means the following. If you dial down the gain on one band, it will raise the output of the entire thing. If I boost this, it brings down the entire gain level, which is great for shaping sounds really fast. Otherwise, it's just a random space. Nothing too specific. I think the random space, and I would need to check this out really quick to make sure I'm not talking bollock. I think I went for that because it has a tendency of sounding slightly metallic under certain circumstances, especially with chords. And in this case, I like that and just ran with it. But really, I'm all about doing this boosting the high end, raising the textures, running sounds through distortion to create texture and movement on top. I'm taking a lot of care about 4 to 20K range. It's as important to me as low end. And it affects the overall impression. And you should also totally check out, maybe as a final thing, I will put this into the recommendations as well. Let's see. This channel, I can't recommend enough. Can you please load? And especially I just can't remember which video I'm looking for. Yeah, I will look for it. And put a link to it. But it's about everything affects everything in the frequency domain, and he does a very good job at explaining the relationship between the sounds better than I could, so I don't. Otherwise, now I got rid of you. Very intelligent. So, hello, eye contact. Nice to meet you after years. Yeah, good to see your name. And I will also put a link down there into our community, which I think is a very rugged place at this point, because I also needed to learn how to run a community. So, yeah, Juan, you're welcome. Thanks for getting back into those details. You're welcome. And Mark writes, thank you very much for the work you've put into this and for sharing your point of view. Worth wrapping one's head around. Yeah, do try. I hope so. And see you in the vault or around here soon, because I would like to do this once a month. If I find something I feel is valuable, useful, or worth sharing, or maybe I will just do some more Let's Patch sessions again, trying to do something from nothing. Maybe sound design sessions. If you're cool with that and want more of this, just talking about synthesis and sound details and sound explorations, I'm up for that any time as well. But yeah, schedule and stuff will follow. Please stay sane, especially in these weird days where it feels like the Matrix has a major glitch about once a day. I hope that no soup will be eaten as hot as it's served, and don't forget the proof of the pudding is always in the eating. So, and with that, I would like to conclude this session and thank you very much for tuning in. Also looking forward to reading your comments and questions, because I also consider this to be just the start of a conversation about a creative safety net. I'm curious to hear what else you think about that. Maybe, I don't know, you have something completely different. Especially if you are also comfy with producing music. My question would be, if you reach a point of getting a little bit stuck and you take that as a pointer, which questions are you asking yourself, or what are you looking for if it's not texture, depth, and groove, as well as the sequences around that. So, and with this said, thank you very much and good night. Now I will figure out how to close this